Hi everyone, and welcome back to a new episode of Liminal Space, the first episode for 2021. Big pleasure today to be in discussion with Bruce Parry. Bruce is an English documentary filmmaker, Indigenous rights advocate, author, explorer, and former Royal Marines Commando officer. He's probably most well known for his multiple BBC documentary series, Tribe, Amazon, and Arctic, where he lived with and learnt from remote Indigenous communities, often in extreme environments, and highlighting important environmental and other issues faced by these tribes. Bruce's latest film project is a feature-length documentary called TAWAI, A Voice from the Forest, focusing on the Penan of Borneo, one of the last remaining nomadic Indigenous people on the planet. This film explores the different ways that humans relate to the natural world and how this influences the way in which we create societies. Bruce also has a deep interest in plant medicines, psychedelics, consciousness, and meditation, exploring different ways in which the lessons learnt from his experiences can be integrated into his own life. So it's a huge pleasure to welcome Bruce Parry to A Liminal Space. Hi, Bruce.
David, hello, mate.
How's it going?
Good, man.
Good. How did I go with the intro?
Yeah, well, yeah, nicely worded.
You've
So
done
we're opposite sides of the world. Where are you exactly?
I'm in Melbourne, Australia.
You're in Melbourne. Yeah, beautiful.
And where are you exactly?
I'm in Wales, UK.
Okay.
Slightly
Nice.
different weather systems, I guess.
Yeah, different time zones, weather systems,
Very
and
different time zones, yeah.
I thought it's been a really great couple of days learning more about your work. I've watched TAWAI, and I've watched the other related kind of mini documentaries, I guess, associated with that, and learnt a lot, and really excited to see where this conversation goes. It was not easy to come up with an opening question, but what I thought was to quote a sentence from TAWAI, which is the easy part, and then I'll ask you the question, which is the more difficult part.
Sure.
The Penan have a word that describes their feelings for the forest. It's a word that doesn't easily translate, a relationship that is hard to describe. They call it TAWAI. So my unfair question to you is, can you do your best to try to describe TAWAI?
Yeah, that's a good opening question, mate. Well, the main reason we chose it is because it's actually very hard to translate. It's almost like we don't have a direct translation for it. I mean, some cultures do, or at least have something closer to it. But in England, or in the English language, which we both share, there's not much that comes close. But there's three occasions it's used in the film, and they all use TAWAI quite differently. There's one time when he says that he's feeling this sort of nostalgia, this memory, this sort of like this feeling of loss of his relationship with the forest. So he goes, I'm feeling this TAWAI for the time gone by and for all these feelings we used to have. So I kind of translate that as a slight nostalgia. And then there's another occasion where he says there's no TAWAI in the destroyed forest, in the forest that the sort of outsiders have come and taken down. So it's like, in that sense, I feel that it's like TAWAI is relating to a natural state, a state that hasn't been too disrupted by humankind, or at least disrupted by our type of human activity. And then there's another occasion he uses it, and to be honest, that's slightly slipped my mind. So long since I sort of watched the film, but like, so essentially, I think what it is like, oh no, that's right. He goes, when I'm in the forest during the fruiting season, I feel TAWAI for the forest. It's like being at the mother's breast. Says it's like a feeling of security, that you know that you're going to be cared for and looked after. And that's why I have TAWAI for the forest. So there you have three very different times that he's used this word, or that different people have used the word. And so in a sense, maybe that can give us a slight insight into what this feeling is. It's like, it's a feeling of deep connection. It's a feeling of being held by nature in a way that you're supported and looked after and comfortable and and a part of it. And yet also it has this sort of sense of nostalgia, and it's also not, it's not like a universal thing, because it's not, when the forest is destroyed, it's not there anymore. So there is this sense of like a pristineness, a sense of like balance and equilibrium with all that is. So it's a mixture of all those things. So, I've given you about as much as I've managed to figure out myself. So, I don't know, what is that word? I mean, it's just a pretty cool word, basically.
It's an amazing word. And I think I love this idea that we don't have language to properly even express a lot of these things. From my own experiences, a lot of this is sort of sensory, our experiences in these foreign places and with remote tribes can be more sensory, I guess. And that's perhaps how they also experience their relationship with each other and with the nature around them. What is it about the Penan in particular? I know you spent a lot of time with a lot of different tribes, but you've got a particular love or connection with the Penan. What is it about them particularly?
David, it was interesting because like I did those series called Tribe for the BBC, and I went all over the world, as you said in your introduction, and I lived with tribal people everywhere, in the deserts and the mountains and the savannas and the oceans and all over, and of course I learned so much from them all, and there's so much wisdom and innate knowledge in all of those groups, and so it was such a privilege. But when I met the Penan, something definitely did shift in me that was different to any of the other groups, and it took me a little while to figure out what that was, because I think if you just went and visited the Penan, it was the first group of indigenous people you'd ever visited, you wouldn't notice it, because they don't look that different. I mean, they're wearing t-shirts, they're smoking, some of them are Christianized, they're like, they just look like a lovely group of people living in the forest. But because I'd been to all of these other groups, I became instantly aware that there was something completely different about them. And I've written about this since, actually, and it's really stayed with me. And what that thing was that they didn't have any competition in their society. They truly were equals. They were what we call egalitarian. And although I'd read that, and I knew that they didn't have leaders and all the rest of it, and didn't have shamans, it was only actually meeting them that I realized how profound this was. And then I discovered later that actually the Penan are one of a few, very few last remaining groups still living deep in the forests of Africa and Southeast Asia that have this egalitarian trait. And anthropologists are now beginning to realize that actually all of the groups that haven't been affected by the agricultural revolution, the Neolithic revolution, who are still in that part of the world, all exhibit these same traits. And it's now thought that actually they exhibit these traits because they're continuing on something that was there for all of us before the Neolithic revolution. And that if that is the case, then for 95% of our time on the planet, we all existed in this way. And what that says to you, or says to me, is, wow, that's super interesting, because we all think that this game of hierarchy and competition that we exist in now, that is always been there. Animals are competitive, animals are hierarchical. Well, humans are too. This is just our natural way. But then you realize, and I could talk about this for the rest of the hour if you wanted to, because I've been off to meet other groups now, and I've really dived into this area. But it really is a different paradigm, to truly live with a group of people who don't have hierarchy, who aren't dealing with all the pressures that we have from this sort of stratification of value and status within society. They are literally all equal, and they work really hard on a daily basis to make sure that they maintain that equality. And the effect of that in the society is that everyone is just so much more together and connected, and they're not having to deal with so many of the problems that we deal with through inequality. They are all seeing each other as exactly the same, equal, sorry, not the same. And And that's another thing, actually, the difference between equality and sameness. We get confused in our society. We think equality means sameness, but actually they don't see that at all. They do see there is a difference between the men and the women. There is a difference between each individual, but those differences, we can celebrate those differences, but they don't mean that you have any more value or status within society. And that is something that's really beautiful. And in a way, it's affected my life massively. It's got me thinking about what's wrong with our society and how we could learn from that. You know, it's a really fascinating subject.
Yeah, and I mean, I'm happy to talk, maybe not for the whole hour, but for a good part of it about this, because I think it's, you know, in one way, I assume that you're going for your own curiosity in your first instance, but, you know, obviously lessons are learnt, lessons are shared, you share it with us, and then I imagine the next step of that is integrating it into, you know, both your life, personal life, and perhaps the communities and societies in which you live. How did you come to that with the Penan? Like, did they express this to you, this egalitarian way of life, or was it through your quiet observation that you discovered this?
Yeah, I mean, like, I obviously do a fair bit of reading before I go and visit any group. And so I'd heard that they were egalitarian. I heard that they didn't have leaders. And I heard that there were nomadic people flowing through the forest. But like I said earlier, it's like it's all very well reading that on the page, but the experience was totally different. And what was really funny was literally from the first moment I met them, I was like, wow, there's something completely different going on here. But I couldn't figure out what it was. It was like everything about who they are and how they're behaving and how they're relating to each other and the forest is totally different to anything else that I'd been with before, in a very subtle way. And so to answer your question, no, they didn't. It wasn't spoken. It took ages for me to figure it out. Because it's invisible. It's actually invisible. It's a way of being rather than a way of acting. And so it took so long for me to discern. And ultimately it was that. It's like basically there's a part of me that I normally have in any given situation. It's like, okay, where am I fitting in this? Where do I fit in this sort of status game and all the rest of it? And it's often subliminal. It's not like I'm actively thinking, where do I fit in? But like, it's just an inbuilt part of our societies that we're very, very sensitive to these sort of judgments around status and value. And it's just part of our sort of feeler system that we feel out into the world to see where we are, because because it's sensitive. It's like, it's a big part of how we relate and who we are. But in that environment, that bit of me that is normally feeling out for that, it had nowhere to go. It didn't have anything to grapple with, because this was a group of people who were all exactly on a par with each other. And that was just really disconcerting in a way. But ultimately, I ended up having to come back and do a load of research. And I remember coming back and going back to the BBC and saying, like, there's something really special about this group, and I really want to go and investigate and stuff. And they were like, oh, don't be ridiculous. You don't believe in utopia, do you? It's like, basically every stage that I've come to in trying to sort of like pull back and sort of like, and try and share a bit more deeply this other paradigm, because it is ultimately another paradigm. I mean, it's almost impossible to discern unless you've actually touched it and been there, because it's so at odds with everything that we are and everything that we've learned. And it just seems like a romantic fantasy to imagine that humans could live together without inequality or without these value judgments. And yet what I've learned is that this doesn't just happen in small groups. This can happen across vast swathes of people in huge areas. And I'm like, this is something really interesting. One of the main reasons that we continue our life the way we do is because we've been led to believe that it's always been like this. But when you realize that 95% of our time on the planet, we actually lived in a completely different paradigm, and that ever since we've taken on this mantle of aggression and hierarchy and ownership and all this sort of stuff, we've had to deal with all of the problems of society, as well as many blessings, there's no doubt. But so much of what has happened in the last few millennia is as a result of this. And could we reevaluate that through this prism of how we actually evolved to be for so long? And yet, whenever I have, in the early days of me having those discussions, most people would just dismiss it as romantic nonsense. And so I've had to do a deep dive into, okay, sure, this is a time gone by for our ancestors. I mean, it's still a time alive today for them, but like for us, it's like, you know, this is like something in a dim and distant past. And it's also was possible in an environment that's very different to our own, where everyone has equal access to abundant resources and all this sort of stuff. And we've gone on this journey that's taken us out of this space and into this whole different game and this whole different way of being, agriculture and separation and dominion and control and all this sort of stuff. And it's brought us great blessings, but it's also potentially going to bring us to incredible discomfort for vast numbers of people. Is there anything we can learn? And then when you dive into how these groups operate, you realize that it's not just like everyone's zenning out and being sweet with each other. They're constantly working at this. This is like, there's tools that they have in their toolkit that maintain this balance. And that's when I suddenly got excited. It's like, if you learn the tools, you can apply them anywhere. It's the tools that are interesting. And it's also the story and the narrative and knowing it's true. You know, narratives are one of the biggest unifying factors or forces in the human cultural toolkit. You know, money is just a story. Religion is just a story. Nationalism is, or nationhood is just a story, but they're very powerful stories that can bring people together, vast numbers who don't know each other, and act under a certain value system. And they had the same. They had the story of no one's more important than anyone else. You know? That's a pretty cool story, but we lost that shit. You know, so if you bring all these, if you understand the tools, you realize that they could come back. And that's been a bit of a head fuck, to be honest, because like it's a bit of a pipe dream, and and most people just sort of like raise their eyebrows and go, dream on, Bruce. But I can't let go of it. It's so big for me.
Well, I imagine it's not the first time in your life you've heard "Dream on, Bruce."
Thanks, David. Yeah,
no, in the sense that, you know, like going through your past, it sounds like your destiny was to be in the Marines and to be something or someone else. And I imagine you're looking back on that, and you know, you're on one hell of a wild journey that's still got a lot to go.
Yeah, there's definitely been some shifts and twists and turns in my evolution, for sure, which have been blessings. You know, they've been difficult. Of course, they always are when you look at yourself and question yourself and and decide that actually you need to shed your skin and move away from that which defined you before. It's terrifying.
Yeah.
But it's always been worthwhile.
And still staying with the Penan for a second, two things. One is it's really apparent in the film, and I'll put a link to the film below where people can check out that film and your website and so forth, that possessions and ownership and sharing is a big part of what makes them who they are in this egalitarian way of life. But then and you also mentioned the word evolution in your own life, but what is it about, like, why are the Penan still practicing this and you and I are not, and the majority of the world is not? Is it some sort of evolution out of that way of life? Is it about the environment? Is it about the conditions? What do you believe?
Well, the word evolution is obviously very loaded because we only see that as a positive thing, but it's not. You know, evolution can go both ways. I mean, some species evolve into something that renders them like extinct within not very long. So evolution doesn't only go in a positive direction. But taking that aside, I mean, no one knows exactly what happens, but of course there are lots of good theories out there by academics And I think the most compelling, and by the way, there's a great book on all this called Civilized to Death, which I can't remember the name of the author, Christopher Ryan. And it's a really beautiful book that looks into these things. And I really highly recommend it. The audiobook especially is very good to your listeners. But so probably what we have is that, and there's a whole nother section to this, which I can talk about later, which is how we became egalitarian. That's, to me, equally as exciting, is because, like, we probably came from hierarchical primates, because most of the others are, other than bonobo. And like, so we quite possibly came from like apex alpha male, aggressive, harem based sort of societies. And yet here we are having groups of people, and now the common belief is that we were egalitarian for the majority of our time on the planet. So how do we go from that apex power system into egalitarianism? That's something that's fascinating for us to learn about today. And there's all sorts that we could talk about later if you want. But which I learned about in Africa with a group of people called the Benjeli in Africa, and how they tell about that very moment. They still have a narrative that talks about that very moment. But anyway, that's not your question. Your question is, how do we get from egalitarian back to where we are now, which is almost more animal-like than the Penan. You know, we've become more primitive, primate-like than we were before. So anyway, so how did that happen? Well, most people think that probably happened when we started leaving the tropics and needing to accumulate food, mostly provisions, to get through a drought or a winter. And the accumulation would have been an opportunity for power to have crept in. Whoever had the most food had the most ability to help others and therefore control others, and on it goes. Alongside that, agriculture, which of course came around 10, 12,000 years ago in various places. And that also would have been a marked moment in our ancestry where suddenly you have realms of, well, I did the work here. I put the seeds in the ground here. Therefore, I'm going to say this is mine. And that level of ownership and control and also the different mindset you have from the manipulation of nature, rather than, of course, the nomadic hunter-gatherer wasn't manipulating nature at all. It was much more in his interest that nature was as it was, and that he or she went out and found things. And so you have two different paradigms there between the hunter-gatherer, who needs things to be as they are, and the farmer, like we are, who needs to control and manipulate. So that's a shift in the mind. And then also this other stuff that may have emerged from the accumulation, you know. And let's not forget that accumulation has brought us great benefits too. You know, it's only through accumulation that we've been able to specialize skills and all the technologies and industries, and so many of the wonderful blessings of our world have come as a result of this shift. But with it have also come these shifts in narrative that tell us that we can control nature, which is just clearly a deadly fallacy that's going to really kick us in the ass if we don't wake up to, because we're not bigger than nature and never have been, and that we can own and store, and then it's totally fine for us to have these disparities in wealth, and that would have come in from the pharaohs on. You know, it's like you can see the slavery and the subjugation of people and the environment that's come about as a result of this. So we have to now discern, okay, we have some great blessings that have come from this period of separation and technological advancements and stuff, but we've also got some extraordinary curses that are there, and we need to look at all of it in the big picture. And we're looking at it just in our own individualistic, what can I get kind of attitude. And that, unless that shifts through an awareness awakening of some sorts, then it's not looking good. I won't be the first who've said that to you on your podcast.
No. Well, I say it to all my guests myself as well. So we're on the track. Is there one thing in particular that you can give an example of, I guess, this special relationship between the Penan and their natural world around them?
Well, if you watch the film, you see I go to visit the Penan, and then I also go and visit a group of people called the Piraha in the Amazon, and and then in my private life as well, I've been to visit the Benjeli in the Congo. And the Piraha aren't exactly egalitarian, but they offer us an insight into. So the reason I go to visit the Piraha in the film is because the Penan have been Christianized, and so they're quite reluctant to talk about their old spiritual ways. And I think that they still have some of their old spiritual ways, but there's this sort of like Christian superstition, if I want to call it that, that has crept in, that's meant that they weren't able to explore it with me as much as I would have liked to, or they were happy to, which is of course totally their prerogative. So to answer that question, I mean, I like to think that it's in the spirit realm in a sense. It's in this sort of realm of belief that some of the most interesting connections are. And so when I went to visit the Piraha, they had this sort of like ongoing dialogue with nature. They called it Kahubuge. And it's impossible to pinpoint exactly what this deity or entity or spirit or whatever it is. Maybe it's their own subconscious, maybe it's something beyond, who knows. But this thing that they had that was talking to them. And I went to meet this group because I'd heard that they were having this sort of dialogue with the spirit realm. And it had been slightly poo-pooed by the person who wrote about it, but I was like, my ears pricked up, because this group is super interesting because they don't have a future or past tense to their language, so everything's about being present. And that one of the main thrusts of the film was that the way that we access this realm is by being very present. You know, it's a meditative state. And hunting and gathering in its own right is a form of meditation. You have to be present to catch the monkey. You have to be present to see where things are growing around you at that time. So they have a daily meditative practice, and the Penan have that, but also the Piraha had that, so much so because they couldn't even think abstract thoughts if they wanted to, because they don't have a language to contextualize things out of the here and now. So I'm like, this is a super interesting group. And they have this running dialogue with this deity. I want to go and ask them where it is that they hear, how do they receive this information? And so I met this guy, TAWAI, and he said, and I had no idea they were going to say this, he said, that Kaubage, he speaks to me in my heart, and then it becomes words in my head. And to me, that was fascinating. But to finally answer your question, what was so special and interesting about that was what Kaubage said. It's not just the fact he's got this running dialogue going on. It's like they're being guided by this dialogue. And he said, without Kaubage, I am nothing. Kaubage directs my life. And then I went out with him into the forest, and he's saying things like, Kaubage tells me I shouldn't take down the big trees. I should only take what I need. I should only behave in a way that's respectful to everything around me. And I think that the Penan still have that, but they were unwilling to say it as clearly. But that's ultimately what it is. It's like they have a relationship. They're guided. They have, and whether it's just a belief system or whether it's truly is something that's beyond, that's guiding them, we'll probably never know till the day we die. But that's something that they have that we seem to be missing. It's an empathic feeling, a connection of the well-being of the forest is the well-being of me and my society. It's, if I hurt you as a tree, I hurt myself too. And so that is what they all have, I think. It's an understanding that their actions have repercussions that are instantaneously felt back on themselves. Our actions are happening so far away that we don't know the devastation of every time we fill our car with petrol, every time I buy palm oil in the shampoo, every time I buy sugar, or whatever it is. We're having a really, very often, a really quite destructive effect somewhere else. And they are much more in tune with their actions because they see the results of their actions. And that mixed with this belief system and this feeling that they have of empathy, it also wraps up into a way that allows them to live a sustainable life, which we clearly don't have.
And sometimes, I feel almost a bit silly trying to intellectualize some of this stuff, like you and I are having a conversation about something that ultimately even the people that are living in this way probably can't describe. It's a feeling, it's a sense, it's a innate connection with their environment. I found that fascinating in the film TAWAI, where it's this sort of method of hunter-gatherer and being constantly and consistently moving and hunting and aware and alert and needing your senses and needing to be aware. And it almost, you sort of articulated it in the film, but it really struck me that they were almost in a permanent state of meditation, a permanent state of mindfulness. They weren't able to, not consciously, but when you're at that moment, you've got to be quiet, you've got to be aware, you've got to know if there are dangers, you've got to, your life, your survival depends on hunting. And, the way that we, our monkey mind, or, always chattering about what's happened yesterday and what may happen tomorrow. Is that how you see it? You see that they're tapping into something that we all can, but that we have either lost the ability to, but there are ways to reconnect with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And really nicely put, David. It's, it's a central theme of the film, I guess. And this is why we use the wonderful scientist Ian McGilchrist, who talks about the two hemispheres. And, if anyone hasn't seen the film, don't raise your eyes and go, oh God, the two hemispheres. It's like, this guy is fascinating, because it was kind of thrown out a long time ago by science, but like he's this polymath that's unpacked it and given it a whole new breath of life. And I think that he answers a great deal of this. And it is available to all of us. But as you said, we are all controlled by the monkey mind, which happens to be the language centers in the left hemisphere. And that's why perhaps cultures and societies over the eons have created these methods, tools, whether it's drinking ayahuasca or eating mushrooms or doing meditation or singing or dancing or chanting or whatever it is, or drumming. These are methodologies for us to get back into the moment, stop that questioning mind and feel something once again. And as you said, the Penan don't need that, because they're doing that practice on a daily basis. They have a daily meditative practice, and we're kind of designed to be like that. And when we are like that, that's when our mind and our body all sort of equalizes. And it's when everything is functioning as it should, then you don't end up just in this sort of left linear processing mind, but actually you become much more connected to your body, your senses, and the right hemisphere, which allows for a wider perspective and sees things in the wisdom of the whole. And there's so much more to be said around that, but in a nutshell, that's it. It's like, if we have a daily meditative practice, we can feel more connected. And that's what they have. And it's what we lost. And it doesn't mean to say, because in the film we say this is what shifted when we turned to agriculture as well. And it doesn't mean to say that you can't be a fully connected, meditative, empathic horticulturalist or agriculturalist. And of course there are many. You can be that, but you don't have to be. Whereas you have to be fully present to be hunting and foraging. There's no way out. If you're not present, you're not going to get the monkey.
Yeah.
And so there is a difference there. And it's possible that over time, as we've become more abstracted in our thoughts and we've become more civilized in these states, and we haven't needed to be exercising this way of being that keeps us present, that we've shifted into this other way of being, this other way of experiencing and relating to the world that only adds to the story of separation and dominion. These are well-proven aspects of the left hemisphere that we seem to be abiding in today. So I think all of these things come together to make this picture and offer us an insight in how to get out of it. It's
Beautifully put, and you've kind of anticipated where I wanted the conversation to go. I've become increasingly interested in the last couple of years with so many things related to consciousness, altered states of consciousness. And I haven't sort of publicly ever spoken about my own experiences in this realm, I guess. And I wanted to do that. And I thought that, you are the perfect person for me to first time publicly, touch on these issues and my own sort of experiences with them. I have had an experience with ayahuasca probably 13 or 14 years ago in the jungle alone in Bolivia, which was a very deep experience for me. But I can say that was sort of a one-off. I was traveling. It was not part of my journey, I guess. That was more something to do where I was. But in the last 2 years, become increasingly interested in plant medicine and psychedelics and the potential to reach higher states of consciousness, and also the healing potential. So are you happy to take the conversation?
Let's go there, mate. Let's go there.
Let's go there. So for those that are saying, what? Can you sort of just summarize, or give a quick overview of ayahuasca,
Sure.
I guess?
Well, there's a number of what we call plant medicines out there, and indigenous groups have discovered these concoctions throughout the world, and they're all different in some ways in how they act on the mind, but they generally have a very similar sort of overarching aspect to them. And ayahuasca itself, I mean, I'd be surprised if your audience haven't heard of it, because it's pretty well known around the world now. But if you haven't, it's like something that's come from the Amazon. It's a mixture of two different plants. There's a vine, and then there's a leaf or different leaves. And I mean, I could get all nerdy now, but I won't give it the Latin names and all that. But there's a vine and a leaf, and basically, when you mix the two, something magical happens. And a substance called dimethyltryptamine, DMT, is allowed to enter the body in a way that it wouldn't be able to if you just had that compound on its own. So basically, the vine has within it something that inhibits the enzymes that would have metabolized the DMT. So that's it's a mixture, and what it does is that particular compound DMT is well known to be, I mean, people call it like the spirit molecule. It locks with the serotonin receptor in the brain. It's also actually endogenous. It's found within, we actually create this ourselves as well, and people don't, it's a huge mystery. Recent studies are just unpacking what exactly this compound is, because it is a naturally occurring compound within us. But when you take a large dose of it, then it interferes somehow with the serotonin receptors, and it gives you an incredibly powerful experience. And so that's ayahuasca. And then there's a number of other compounds like that in different plant medicines to be found around the world, including, magic mushrooms here in my back garden, and stuff that's everywhere. So why would we call them, plant medicines? It's like nearly all of the pharmaceuticals that we take in our society have come from plants, and yet we call some things illicit drugs and other things like, doctors prescribe beautiful drugs, and the whole way we draw our lines around these things is really strange. And it's mostly about taxes and control and just pharmaceutical industry and culture and a whole bunch of stuff. But so most of our drugs are coming from the plant world, aspirin and all the rest of it. And yet when it comes to drugs for the mind, we steer well clear of them. It's not strictly true, but we don't deal with that problems of the mind in the same way these tribal people do. They have the whole forest also, which is a pharmacy for them, where they can go and find things that will do the same as us. It's all a pharmacy. Will stop bleeding, stop headaches, stop childbirth, whatever it is. They have all of the pharmacy, but they also have these few that we now call plant medicines, and like the government will call illicit, psychedelic, dangerous, like whatever. But they have these medicines which they also use for rebalancing the psyche, the mind. And when you have the incredible privilege of spending time with these people and realizing that they are the doctors of their own environment, and they understand how the right dose and how to use it and how to hold you when it goes slightly into a potentially uncomfortable situation, that they know what they're doing. And when us in the West, who as we were talking a minute ago, were saying, we're unbalanced in our heads, and also we're carrying a lot of trauma in our bodies, and these medicines can help with that. And so when you go with a group of people and they hold your hand and they give it to you correctly, you can have the most extraordinary healing experience. And I often say there's 2 or 3 aspects that you can generalize about what might happen if you are lucky enough to be held correctly in one of these healing journeys. And they go as follows. Often what will happen is you will take one of these medicines, and because it feels like it takes over the mind in a way, it's very powerful, and so you slightly lose yourself to a dream world often. And what will happen in that space is that whatever was just beneath the surface of your subconscious mind, that often you are not aware of at all, but is there and has been there for a very long time, you realize that you revisit a moment that may have caused a deep trauma for you, often as a child, that is actually influencing your behavior on a daily basis that you're completely unaware of. Because maybe a dog attacked you, or maybe you were assaulted, or something horrible. We all have our different stories, but these are memories that are stored within us, often within the body, in the stomach and the chest. And these are like trapped energy balls of trauma that, if anything comes close to reminding us of that in some way, then we have a reaction that stops us going there. But in the hands of these wonderful plant healers, you're in a ceremony where you take this thing and you're invited to let go, and it's going to be difficult, but you also believe deep down that it's going to be worthwhile in the long run, because that maybe you've reached rock bottom, and this is the last opportunity you have to let go of this, whatever it is that's causing you your addictions or your problems in life or whatever, because often they can cause all sorts of deep problems. And in that dream state, you might revisit that memory of that time whereby that trauma occurred to you. And what might happen is that you are able to revisit that with the mind of an older, more compassionate, more loving, more mature, wiser person, and then go, oh my God, it was just that. It was just that. And I was so young, I didn't know that. And it's no surprise that I've tightened up and withdrawn, but actually I now have the ability to let that go. And what might happen is that the neural pathway that controls the reaction is because of the way that the molecules are going through the neural pathways. That's what the DMT is doing, is it allows perhaps for a new pathway to grow, so that you can not react in this sort of subconscious, unconditional way, or conditioned way, and act differently. So that's one thing that can happen, which, as you can imagine, is incredibly powerful. And I'm really looking forward to hearing what your experience was, Dave. And another thing is that often you will get an experience of connecting to something that just feels well beyond yourself. So, you know, the scientific, the sort of material scientific realm at the moment would suggest that consciousness is just the firings of neurons in your brain, and that's it. And we're the only ones with it, and like we're just walking around, and it's all happening up here. And then you take something like ayahuasca or one of these other medicines, and you're like, oh, okay, that story doesn't fit. That story seems nonsense. This shit is much bigger than that. And you know, and then you could go into all sorts of extraordinary realms, and they can be spooky and beautiful and a whole bunch of different stuff. And that everyone will have a different, every journey you do will be different. But it's not uncommon for you to have this experience where it feels like this sense of consciousness, of which we think is just here, is actually expanded out into the everything. And you know, and it can be, and you can actually literally dissolve as a being and just become the universe. And I've had those experiences, and many others have too. And then when you come back from that, you're given an opportunity to go, right, but when you come back from all of these things, it doesn't change you, but you have had these profound insights. And you can either then just go, oh, well, that was just taking a drug, it means nothing at all, stick it in a box and forget about it. Or you can go, that's interesting, that felt real to me. What philosophies of life are there out there that might explain that? And material science doesn't explain it. But there are other ideas and other thoughts and other theories that might explain it. And they become super interesting. And the reason that I like some of these other views is because if one absorbs and adopts those other views, you realize that your behavior has ramifications, that you're connected to this external world. You're not separate, you're part of it. And that actually everything I do, there's a reaction, and that I have to limit my behavior in certain ways. It's not just all about me. And so these things offer you a window into seeing another way. Another thing that will happen is you might often come to look at some decisions that you've made or behaviors that you have in life, and you see yourself like really who you are. And you know, it's very different. I mean, I haven't spent much time on the couch, you know, but like I know friends who've done that and then done ayahuasca, and they said they were always able to sort of like mentally joust and egoically argue with their psychotherapist and go, yeah, whatever, I'm not buying into that. But when you see it for yourself, it's like, oh shit, this is how I behave, this is who I am, this is how I'm treating my loved ones, this is the sort of life that I'm leading. Then you see it in a way that you can't deny it. There's no like arguing with the psychotherapist. It's like, shit, this is true, this is real. And sometimes these can be incredibly deep realizations that invite you to like change every aspect of your life. And that can be also really disconcerting. And so at the end of these experiences, I've gone on a lot, David, I know, but like at the end of these experiences, you're given a choice. You know, it doesn't change you, but you're like, okay, how do I've opened this window into who I am, how I'm behaving, and what is possible. What do I want to do with that? You know, and then if you've got enough courage, you can step forth and go, I'm going to change, you know. And so for me, that's a pretty good medicine.
I'm glad I asked the question. I'm glad you answered it in that open, honest, and as much as you say everybody out there may know about these things, I it all depends on the circles we move in, and things can, we can get this sort of incorrect idea, I guess, that everybody knows about something. But I mean, it's becoming much more, I won't say mainstream, but it's becoming more talked about, absolutely. And I wanted to, and thank you, like, honestly, that was such a beautiful way. I couldn't have asked for anybody to start this discussion for me, because I want to take this podcast in the future down these sort of journeys as well. So this is a really awesome way to begin. So thank you for that. I mean, you've beautifully talked about so many things. I guess just what I'd like to maybe add to that is it can work, I guess, in two ways, like internally, in the sense of your own behavior and your own trauma and so forth. But, absolutely what I experienced and what I continue to experience is this deep connection to the world around me, to others, to nature, it's made me more empathetic. It's definitely, has it made me more empathetic, or it's revealed something to me and then I've worked on that? I feel I'm more empathetic. I'm trying to be more empathetic. I feel I'm trying to be less judgmental in my life. And also it's sort of bringing me closer to maybe pure speculation, but these big questions of who we are, and what does it mean to be alive, and what does it mean to be human, and is there a God, and where did we come from? And I don't know. I think I'm really happy that I've sort of discovered this relatively late in life, I would say, as well, because I don't think that I was mature enough nor equipped as a young lout to handle some of this stuff, or maybe to approach it in a more responsible way. And I've spent a lot of time with. I've travelled a lot in Papua New Guinea. I've been through the Amazon. I've done quite a lot of travel with Indigenous tribes. I'm always sort of by myself, and it's really deep experiences. Absolutely, amazing. So thank you for articulating your experiences in that way. I guess the question then is, how do you take that experience from the Amazon or wherever you are in that particular plant medicine, and how do you integrate it into your life?
Thank you, David. And lovely to hear your story as well, mate. The difficulty that we have with this awakening to the plant medicines is that, we can go and live with a group of people and be held in this way that's safe and be looked after by people who know what they're doing. But of course, we don't live there, and we might only be there for a day or two while we have a ceremony. And then we've got this whole unpacked suitcase of our life. We then have to figure out what on earth to do with that. And sometimes that can be really overwhelming if you've had a really, really difficult realization. And it is one of the criticisms of plant medicine, is that there is no aftercare. There is no support system for people who have these profound realizations. And so much so that it can actually be really discombobulating for people coming back. And while I genuinely believe that it's always good to go on this journey and that the blessings are always there, I do think that it is a positive thing. It can, in the short term, be really disruptive for some people, and people should know that. So the integration, as your question asks, is really vital, and finding a group of people that understand this in your home life isn't always necessarily going to be easy. If you think, I'd really like to do that, but if I even told my mates, they'd think I'm crazy, and then off you go. That's a really brave act, and I would advise trying to connect with people who understand this, whether on your travels or when you get home or whatever, so that you don't feel you're all alone trying to unpack this. because it would be very easy to then just be told to stick it all back in the briefcase and do up the lid and forget all about it, because that's the easy option. But actually, we need to keep investigating these things that we've unpacked, and that is the work. Like I said, you're invited to open the window and look. It doesn't cure you necessarily. It invites you to do the work and shows you the direction to go in. So yeah, the integration and the afterwork is vital. And it's just a real shame that all of those people in our societies who used to know this stuff were pretty much killed off. It's like, in the UK at least, or in Europe, it was they were burnt as witches, and anyone who had that sort of knowledge were persecuted. And so we've lost it. And I know that you have an indigenous culture over there that would understand this much better, but that's not necessarily an easy thing to access. And I don't know enough about the connections out there for you to go knocking on doors. Perhaps if you already have a relationship, then that might be a place that would be able to understand and support if it's a two-way thing.
I mean,
so go on.
No, the question, and the way I do this podcast really is sort of, I'm asking the questions on behalf of people that may be listening and wherever they are in the world, I guess. And I think it's really important. And what I'm attempting to do is, or what I hope to do with this chat and ongoing is to smash this stigma associated with it, because when there's a stigma, you then, there's not support because it's classed as illegal. And it's crazy. And it's not for everyone. I believe that. And it's hard work. It is absolutely hard work. It's not fun. It can be a real roller coaster. But I think, I'm really happy to sort of have this chat with you and to hear your experiences of it. And for you, is it this sort of plant medicine, is it very closely related to meditation and mindfulness and sort of do you see it as something different, or do you see it as Sam Harris, I assume maybe Sam, the neuroscientist, would say that psychedelics are a shortcut to meditation, to reach higher levels of consciousness, and maybe shortcuts aren't too bad? Do you see them in the same family or something different?
I definitely see them in the same family. And I also think that, a Vipassana retreat it works very well with different psychedelic journeys along the way and different forms of meditation. I think, like I said earlier, I think they're all tools that we've found over the years to help us reconnect. And that, alongside yoga and chanting and drumming and a whole bunch of other stuff that, if you do in a certain way, can bring about a deeper sense of connection in whatever way that is. I think that psychedelics are curious in that, as you say, they're like a shortcut. I mean, I often describe them more like a wet fish around the face. It's like, it's a slap, and it can be pretty messy. I think that these things are good mixed. I think that I have friends who've just been on a meditative path, perhaps with a particular doctrine in their mind that has been, it's been a long journey. And then one session of ayahuasca has given them a massive head sort of leapfrog in their work, because it's broken them through something that's enabled them to go further. So, I think that there's so many ways that we can have these experiences, and that it's really important that to my mind, that the narrative that we surround these things by is also wholesome, because, as you said, as you asked, is how similar is the ayahuasca to the meditation and all the rest of it. In some ways, they're very similar in that you have this opportunity to access something, you have this opportunity to connect to something. But what happens after that is we have to then contextualize that into our life somehow. And what you often find is that the purveyor of the medicine or the ritual or the tool has his own or her own version of what's going on, and that will be the thing that you go, wow, okay, cool, that makes sense. And we have to be really careful here, because one thing is for sure, and you see this with gurus and cult leaders and shamans and all sorts, it's like when you are in that experience, if you are having a life-changing moment that's allowing you to heal and access a part of yourself that you've never accessed before and experience something that's so profound, it's very overwhelming. And it is also very possible that you can then just listen with awe to whoever it was that has all this wisdom and knowledge that brought you this thing. And I just urge your listeners to be wary of the person who brought it, to take much more care of what your own experience was and not what you're told how to contextualize it. And so there is a difference, between what a shaman might say and what a Buddhist guru or monk or leader might say, and also what a Christian person might say, and all the rest of it. And so we all have our different narratives for this. And I personally like the narratives that come from our indigenous folk, because they have this sort of relationship with nature, a relationship with the ancestors. That feels to me a context that I like. And for a long time, I was also very sort of excited and enthralled with some of the teachings that came from the East, but they're not the same. They will try and contextualize this experience in a way that fits, but they're not the same. And so we have the choice of what we want to believe as far as what these experiences are. They all have good intention, I believe, unless you've got some particular individual who is really trying to manipulate. And we have to be very careful, because these are powerful things. And our culture, as we said earlier, doesn't support that. We're having to look elsewhere for the context. And that means that we're having, we can get caught up in the stories that go around that. So yeah, I've moved away a little bit myself in some of the things that might come alongside the meditative versions of the story. And I've definitely shifted more towards a more indigenous narrative, because for me, it fits with the times, it fits with my experience, it fits with how I want to relate to nature, which isn't necessarily so embedded in those other teachings, which perhaps might be more about leaving this place or something similar, whereas I'm more about being here and creating a world for the future generations and that sort of stuff. And that means taking care of nature. So, this is a subtle difference. I mean, you asked me what were the differences. Were they the same? Were they different? I think there are differences. So, just be careful.
Yeah. Thank you so much. I'm conscious of time. I know you got things to do. If you don't mind, I might just ask you, it would be irresponsible of me not to. What is the main lesson that you've taken from all of these journeys, or all of the, I'm not talking about psychedelics, I'm just talking about the time spent with Indigenous tribes, with peoples, with your experiences. Sort of what have you taken away as a core value? What should we take away as a way, for the future? That what can we learn? What are the lessons learnt, and how do we apply? I know it's not an easy final question. I apologize for that. Yeah. And what are you doing in your life to with this knowledge of this more egalitarian way of life?
Sure. Well, I think the biggest thing I've learned is that actually we as a species, humankind, are very malleable and very pliable, but we have the capacity to be amazing. We have the capacity to create societies that are incredibly loving and harmonious. And that isn't just romantic nonsense. It's a reality. we are capable of working together in vast numbers in a really harmonious way with each other and with the environment that holds us. That is possible, you know, and but beneath our layers of conditioning, of which we all have so many from our school, from our parents, from our society, which might not tell us that we're amazing. It might tell us something quite different. But if we can shift our belief to truly understand that beneath these layers of conditioning is something really beautiful and really pure, and that we really are, each of us, capable of living extraordinarily beautiful lives, then that might inspire people to go on that journey of looking inside and going on that healing journey. Because if you don't believe that it's worth going there because you're only going to find something shitty at the bottom, you're not going to go looking. But if you can genuinely believe that we're capable of something and that we all have that, and actually I'm not a bad person, I'm just wounded and I can find something beautiful, then we have a chance together of doing the healing that's required, that we can feel more deeply and connect once again to each other on this beautiful planet. And that's it, you know. And once we are going on that journey and taking on that new belief, then we will find the empathy, we will find the connection that will allow us to create these new societies, and an egalitarian society or whatever it is that emerges from that place. We'll realize that we're better off together, we're better off as equals, we're better off looking after each other, bringing people up when they're down, and sort of like teasing people to bring them down when they're getting ahead of themselves, and taking care of this planet. And we've done that successfully for 95% of our time here. And we've gone a little bit off piste, but we can do it again if we want it. So that's my learning from my travels.
Amazing. Thank you. You're amazing. It's been a brilliant opportunity to have the chat. Again, I'll put links to your website and to that film, and I really recommend everyone go out and watch as much as they can about this. And hopefully we get the chance when borders open and all that sort of stuff to meet in person.
Wouldn't that be nice?
You're a champion.
All right, mate.
Thanks, Bruce. Have a good day. See you, brother.
Cheers, pal. And you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Many thanks for watching. I'd love for you to be notified of new episodes, so subscribe and hit the bell button below. Like and share this video, and feel free to leave any comments or questions below. You can also visit liminalspace.earth to discover all episodes. But for now, many thanks again, and I'll see you next time in a liminal space.